in church, and we are all blessed to be joined by Matt Engle. Matt, it's great to talk to you again. How you been?
Exactly. I'm good, man. Good. I'm kicking it in a hotel in Atlanta, working with a bunch of guys over here. So
yeah, I'm just gonna introduce Matt to everybody. Matt, you got your start working off at an ASU. That's my alma mater. That's where I graduated from. What was your role at ASU?
Yeah, so we were, most people on the call would know it as like enrollment management. We called it engagement management because we like to be different. And so basically think through the lens of, the recruitment and retention of students, right, at ASU. So spent quite a bit of time there, kind of just, lo and behold, we didn't like smartly go into it, but kind of looking backwards now, it was like, yeah, we actually, figured some cool things out. Now most universities across the country have really replicated what we were able to do at ASU. So it's pretty cool.
And then you were at ASU, you moved into the ministry at a local church here in the Phoenix metro area. Where was that at?
Yep, out in Gilbert. Just,
yep.
I'm fortunate because I've got ties to Christ Greenfield and you guys from way back when. But I pastored for a long time out there. The Lord basically said, I've given you the ability to see this stuff at ASU. I want you to take it and apply it into the local church. And, in just under, what was it? In just under four and a half years, we were, when I started, we were about 2,000 people. In about 4 years, we grew to about 9,500 adults on a weekend. And, basically taking the same stuff that we had learned at ASU and applying it into the church. It was pretty fascinating.
Awesome. And then from the local church, then to Glue, where you're blessing a whole bunch of churches right now.
That's right.
Yes. And that's where I got to know you. I was in a cohort accelerator. We were studying millennials and the use of big data to reach millennials, and that's where I really got to meet you. Talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing with Glue and your role there.
Yeah. So it started with this idea that all the key players that want to impact the kingdom are still there. What we kind of bumped into was the hypothesis was that maybe funding wasn't a problem and content wasn't a problem because money's always existed. The richest dude on the planet was Solomon, and he still messed up. Like content, scriptures existed for thousands of years, so that wasn't a problem. But what we ended up kind of coming to the reconciliation of was it was basically capabilities underneath organizations like churches that help equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. That was the limiting constraint. And so at Glue, you guys, and there's about 120 churches that I kind of sort of run with. And basically we're just like a big R&D shop. Like we're testing things, we're learning stuff. I'm going to share a bunch of stuff with you guys, but that's really what I do. That's what I'm doing here in Atlanta is meeting with, North Point, 12 Stone, and all these guys that are wanting to just kind of figure out, okay, what's something new and different that we can test, learn, and see if that's something that, wants to happen. So it's pretty fun.
So I had my mind blown listening to you talk at some of these accelerator conferences, and it was really kind of an eye-opening experience, kind of getting to know. Like I'd always been working with data. I'm a very data-driven guy, very, kind of a Excel guru, spreadsheet, but just kind of hearing the next level of what actually happens in the country, in business, in nonprofits, now into churches, how to reach people more effectively with data. Talk a little bit about why churches should be valuing data. Like, talk a little. What is your starting point? Why is this too much of a corporate thing? What is the story behind that? What's the big why behind churches using data?
Yeah, I mean, so where again, I would love to be able to say that yeah, we were so smart. This is exactly what we did, and it worked perfectly. Like we just ran a bunch of stuff and we backed into everything. So it's not like that this was an original thought, but what we started doing, and you know, in churches, we're pretty good about, you know, taking a story of one thing and then applying that across the rest of the church, right? So one person comes up to me and says, "Man, Matt, that was a great sermon. You crushed it." Yet, you know, 3,000 people walk out the door and they're ticked off at me because I said suck on the stage or something like that, right? Like they're like, so I took one story and I applied it across all these people that, man, everybody must have loved it. Well, what we started realizing is that it's pretty simple. You know, Nehemiah 1:1-4 is kind of what we anchored into, which was the guy just asked two questions: tell me about the people and tell me about the city. He wasn't even the spiritual leader at the time. Ezra was, but Nehemiah gets the data from his brother and his friends. And then here's what I love about it is from chapter 1 to chapter 2, what is he doing? He's praying, he's mourning, he's weeping, and he's fasting. So he gets data, he starts processing through with the Lord, but then chapter 2 verse 1, he gets to work. And in church world, that's one of the things that I just tend to not see very often is we either have ready, aim churches, or ready, fire, aim, right? And so this idea of data really came from scripture of Nehemiah. And it was like, I got these two data points. Now I'm going to honor the process of seeking the Lord's wisdom in it, but we're going to get to work. So, you know, Proverbs says, you know, what's the condition of your flock? I think that there's some level of data input that needs to come into the equation. And, you know, I look at it this way: Jesus was a priest, a prophet, and a king. And the kings throughout scripture are the ones that cared about data. You know, I don't think when Jesus says the 5,000, feeding the 5,000, he could have just said, there were a lot of people there, but there's like specificity to, you know, numbers and what does it mean and all that. And you know, I hate to say it, but like in seminary, we don't learn about data outside of the book of Numbers. Like outside of that, it's like we're in our own devices at this point. And it doesn't have to be scary either. I mean, it doesn't have to be manipulating Excel. It's just being cognizant of the inputs that are coming into the equation. So
Awesome. So before we proceed anymore, please forgive me. I had meant to start us off with a quick prayer, and then just to kind of let folks know, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get to those as we get closer to the end of the webinar. So real quick, I think Nehemiah was a great kind of thing for us to pray on. Lord, help us to use data more effectively. Let us take this time to reflect on what it means to learn about the people and learn about the city. Lord, we are so thankful to have our guest Matt with us, and we are very, very eager to do some incredible learning. And just please bless this time together and all those who are joining us in Jesus' name. All right, just one more reminder: if you got any questions, go ahead and pop that in the message bar, and we'll be collecting all of those. So what would you say to somebody? I've had this said to me before, when we talk about data and kind of a passion to get into data. Mm-hmm. Some people might offer a criticism saying, hey, isn't that too corporate?
Yeah.
What do you say to those that say that's too corporate of a way of approaching ministry?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I look at it from this perspective. You know, we're spirit-led, we're Christ-centered, and we're data-informed. I don't even use the term data-driven. I use data-informed, because I do believe that the Lord can whisper something into our ear that says, hey, I want you to take a right. And even though the data says go left, you know, that intuition that the Lord gives us, the power of the Holy Spirit, you know, we go right, but we're just data informed. So it's like we're supposed to go right. We're just acknowledging left, and that's it. Right. And so I don't think it's too corporate-y. I think that sometimes is a cop out for churches that think that they can just kind of pass that off as like, well, we don't do that. It's like, no, you should. You're going to be held accountable to the Lord over the people that are in your pews. And the better I know my people, the better I can equip them with the thing that matters disproportionately for that person. If I just, I usually caveat our discussions, and Jack, you know this, is like, you know, I've been blessed with the spiritual gift of sarcasm, so I'm probably going to say some stuff on this call that you guys might think that I don't love Jesus. I do, but it's like, for the most of the time, you know, ministry was like, we just sort of pray and spray everybody, and that was it. And I think that the Lord has us in a position to be better than that. I think you can look through, you know, the testimony, you can look through the Gospels, and Jesus multiple times, he left the 99 for the one, right? That means he knew the one was gone. So if I just took my blueprint from that, I'm going, no, that's not a corporate thing. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just an input. It's data.
Yeah. I guess the way I think of it is data allows us to be more wise. Yep. And I think you nailed the word, is intuition. Yeah. I think a lot of people approaching ministry from a traditional perspective are used to making decisions almost exclusively using intuition.
That's right.
And what we're hoping is that leaders would not eliminate that they would continue to use intuition, but they would use data and intuition together to make even better decisions.
That's right.
And sometimes that data complements the intuition. Sometimes that data challenges our intuition, and it causes us to be more thoughtful about what we're doing. Right?
Yeah, I usually make a joke about, you know, for my Baptist friends, it's like butts, budgets, baptisms, and buildings are kind of what we measure, right? The 4 B's. And I'm like, I don't really care as much about the activity as much as I care about the outcome associated with the activity. I mean, and we've seen this countless times. Some of the most astonishing things within some of the churches that I kind of run with. I mean, we've stumbled into some crazy things. Like there's a large church here in Atlanta. We found, in looking at all of the data, over 70% of the people that were their time at the church did not do one single other activity other than they were known in the system. They didn't give, they weren't in a group, they weren't serving. And they're sitting here going, holy cow, that is a ton of people that are just on the bench. They're not even in the game.
Just existing.
Yeah. So things like that, you know, one of the things that every church on this call today should be doing, if you believe in the power of prayer, is like, look at your prayer requests. That's data. Yeah. That's the closest that I could get as a pastor to my people's heart, was when they would submit a prayer request or come down front and we would pray over them or something. And it was like, we would say, hey, send in your prayer requests and we're going to pray over it. And every Wednesday at 9:00 we had staff prayer, but nobody ever analyzed the prayer request to say, what are the themes and patterns that are emerging? So just quick on that story is, so we took 3,000 prayer requests over 3 months. We had 3,000 prayer requests come in. I basically just read each prayer request for what it was. If it said marriage, I put marriage. If it said divorce, I put divorce. If it said relationship, I put relationship, right? Find the key word, apply it across the board. And I took that data and I popped it into a word cloud. And the number one prayer request of the 3 months that we had, the number one prayer request was marriage. Well, I'm an expositor by nature. And so we were going through the book of Acts, and the number one prayer request is like marriage. Well, where do I cover marriage in the book of Acts? It's like Ananias and Sapphira, and they both died for lying. So that's my pro-marriage talk, where I can actually hit on, you know, what the majority of the people in the church were actually praying for. The other thing about data, this is just prayer. Well, that's all we're talking about is prayer requests. The other thing that was really fascinating was when I looked at men who were under 35. If you are a church and you want to thrive, you have to crack the code on men who are under 35. Because if you win that demographic, you'll win as a church, guaranteed. Mm-hmm. That's just tried and true. So when I looked at the prayer requests of men under 35, the number one prayer request from that demographic was mentorship and leadership.
Wow.
And I would make fun of that demographic regularly, going, you know, if you're a millennial, get out of your parents' basement and quit playing video games, get a job, right? Like, but then when I saw that, it was like, holy cow, we have all of these millennial males raising their hand, asking for prayer around mentorship and leadership. And I'm not doing anything to connect the dots. And I haven't done any, that's not a big lift for anybody on this call. So those are some ways in which you could absolutely radically improve the knowing of your people by just looking at it from that perspective versus measuring the activity of, did we pray for everybody? Yes or no? It's like, we did, but here's the analytic behind what we learned.
So that's awesome. And I think most churches do have a practice of capturing prayer requests as part of their weekly rhythms. I've done that before, where I've built the word cloud to see kind of what the themes are, but I've never thought about even thinking about breaking it apart demographically. What are men saying? What are women saying? What are people of different ages saying? That's a great thought. Awesome. Really cool.
And I mean, you guys in particular having multiple locations. Now imagine like one location versus another location. And then now we can actually be informing strategy at our churches based upon these varying components that are actually beginning to emerge. And again, and I'm not a researcher. I'm not a statistician. I just happen to enjoy, 7th grade science, which is always an experiment to me. So it's kind of like, but that's something that easily you guys could take and run with right now. And I would begin to, what we did is we once we figured out that this was a good idea, what we did is we actually watched it every quarter. We would, and then we put the prayer word cloud underneath each sermon series that we were going through, so that the following year, when we would get into a planning perspective of the next calendar year, we looked backward to say, hey, the number one prayer request from January through April was finances. Well, that might mean that we should have been teaching financial stuff even pre-Christmas, because nobody was paying attention during Christmas when it was all spend less, give more. Right. So that's something that you guys can easily do.
Wow. Fantastic. So that's an example of, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's an example of what we would call first party data, right?
Yep, that's right.
Something that might be beneficial for folks to know is that there's different types of data and different ways to use different types of data. Can you walk us through first party, second party, third party data? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for sure. So first party data is all of your own data. It's, they checked in a child, they've given regularly, they give by credit card or by check or by cash. All of those incremental things are first party data. Second party data, what I like to say with second party data is really it's somebody else's first party data. So for example, if anybody on the call has done the Enneagram or taken the DISC profile or any sort of assessment, that really is somebody else's first party data. But in this instance, it's second party data. So assessment data, second party data. Third party data is what I call sourced data. So it exists out in the world. Companies are using third-party data to understand, how should a bank finance a loan on Matt, and my wife's name is Denise, Matt and Denise Engel. They're going to use third-party data to see, well, are we at risk for X, Y, or Z? And that goes into the mortgage calculation. So third-party data is sort of that extra layer of data that exists out there that can be pulled in. The uniqueness of each data is they all have value. It's dependent upon where you want, like the golden ticket, honestly, is stitching first party, second party, and third party data together. And what I mean by that is Matt Engle, and I'm a DISC DI, I'm a high DI or whatever it is. And then I'm motivated this way. That's third party data. So now that I'm a male, I attend this church. My kids are this age, I'm a high DI and I'm motivated this way. I just stitched all that data together, and you now know me disproportionately a better way to pastor me, right? Yep. Because I've stitched all of that together. I can do it with just first party data, but the best scenario is when you've stitched everything together.
So some scenarios, most churches, they've got a register of their members and their guests. So they've got names and hopefully ages and addresses where they live. They've got attendance records. They've got giving records. They've got prayer requests. And they've got maybe surveys that they're sending out to try and get feedback from their members.
That's right.
First party data.
That's
right. And then second party. So I'm thinking of some examples like that. Barna, they go out and they do research. They do a big, massive survey to find out national trends. That's right. In the category of second party data, right?
That's right. That would be.
So that then helps the leader know, oh, here's the trends in the country, here's where we're going as a society, here's things that we can react to.
That's right.
And then third party data, then you said they're aggregating. I've heard this word, data aggregators. They're
That's
aggregating
right.
things, and they're also kind of using that to make predictive models, right?
That's right. That's right.
Talk about the predictability. How does that work?
Yeah, so we by nature are pattern people. We just are. And if you look through the Old Testament, they knew prophecy in the Old Testament by pattern recognition. Something was prophetic. It was like, hey, there's a pattern that's emerging. They're looking at the pattern going, oh, that must be prophetic then. So what predictive modeling really is saying, hey, based upon people that are 5 minutes ahead of you, that have done all the same activities that you're currently doing, odds are you're going to probably fall into that camp of doing that thing that they've done already. So the example I like to give is the women that shop at Target for the babyregistry.com thing, right? So it's like, hey, that's an incentive for me and my wife. When we had kids, we went in and registered at Target. We told Target when we were due. What did they do? They aggregated our shopping patterns. They knew then, hey, a lot of people that look like Matt and Denise Engel have bought all of these things. Well, what they do is they take that pattern and apply it over other individuals. What they're now able to do is say, we know not only that you're pregnant, but when you're due, so we're going to be able to send you coupons around that idea. And you guys probably have heard that story, up in Minnesota, the 16-year-old girl that was getting coupons from
Target. Talk about that.
So back in it was like 06, a dad was working from home in Minnesota, went down to get the mail, opened up the mail. There was a bunch of coupons from Target to his sister, breast pumps, formula, diapers, all this stuff, strollers. And so he calls Target and is like, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, my daughter's 16 years old. 2 weeks later, she comes and tells mom and dad I'm pregnant. So why and how? Well, she fell into a pattern. She didn't register with them, but she fell into a pattern that she was buying certain things like every other person that has bought those same things.
I think I remember it was like multivitamins and unscented lotion or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's multivitamins, cotton balls, and unscented lotion.
Right.
And apparently there's a pattern there that says if you do that, odds are that you are more than likely, not less likely to be pregnant. So, and we do this the same thing. Like I can do it without even being like a data scientist, because I've done it I did it at my church. I could predict who was going to leave our church 6 months before they actually left our church, because I was the predictor. I was looking at the patterns. Yep. And it was like, oh, here's a common set of patterns that have emerged with our people. And the outcome was 6 months from that pattern, they were gone. So we started having pastoral moments with these people. Instead of waiting for somebody to call and say, hey, can I have coffee with you? It was like, no, we were proactively pastoring our people and knowing who we should spend our time with from that shepherding perspective. So it's not super hard. You just have to be willing to look for those specific patterns.
And you mentioned that giving was one of those patterns, right?
Giving was a pattern. And some of this probably, again, some of this intuitively makes sense. They went from automatic reoccurring credit card payment, they stopped it and went to a check. Well, that was a trigger for us to know, okay, they just went from a reoccurring motion, something happened. And so we could call them and pastor that. Hey, I'm just checking in. I how are you doing? How's everything? Oh, you know what? I just lost my job. Things are not looking good. I think I might have to move, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? All we did was just come alongside people looking for those particular things.
Wow. Really cool. So using predictive data, churches have been able to figure out things about the neighborhood. That's one of the things that Glue does, right? You can map around the area of the church, and Glue is using this aggregated data to kind of say, this is what we predict about the community, right?
That's right.
It doesn't know, these people never filled out a survey, but it's aggregated this data, and it can say things about the community, about the condition of marriage, right?
That's right.
Marriage, addiction, people's relationship with the Bible, their spiritual posture. It says all kinds of things about the community and even about your own community if you want to kind of upload that to see what it looks like. It's not that they've ever asked these people a survey. They're just
Right.
looking at predictive data. And you can say, on average, somebody who looks like this might be suffering in their marriage, right?
That's right. And so there's like, in the third party data realm, there's like 3 different categories, if I call them that. The first category of third party data is like the demographic stuff. Again, and it's third party data because it's aggregated. So you've got demographics as one. The next bucket or category within the third party data is what I call emotional data. So this is saying like, hey, what's your spiritual style or your spiritual posture toward church? And if I know that, wow, you know what, Joy, she's a high relator, but man, Jake, he's a high studier. Well, now I can instantly adjust my messaging because I can connect with Joy differently than Jake. Right. And so that's the second bucket. The third bucket is what I call psychographics. That's a fancy term for basically motivational data, meaning how do I need to say the message? So and what this looks like is imagine you're given a sermon and in one instance, and I've done this, so I'll just use the example that I gave. Hey, for some of you, you need to hear that we all fall short of the glory of God. For some of you, you need to hear we all suck at something. Said 2 different ways, same call to action, same point, but I've now reached 66% of my congregation because I used the phrasing that they needed to hear the message. Again, the Lord designed us all uniquely, right? And if he knows every hair on our head, chances are some of you might have just been offended that I said suck on the Zoom call. That's okay, because that's how you're wired, right? There's an element on the other side that's like, no, I feel the same way. Like, so that the psychographic is that third category. So when you start knowing that component, you're running the Nehemiah scenario. They used big data back then. The challenge is it was all analog gathered, right? Because the brother and the friends were literally walking around the town aggregating everything up so that when they showed up with Nehemiah, they said, man, the people are really jacked up and the walls are all burning, coming down, right? They took all of their learnings and applied it into this rolled up thing. So that's where it's like, I care about what's underneath the waterline of the iceberg, not just the top. And I can see age, I can see probably income, I can see some of that stuff. But man, if I knew that, you know what, Patty, we'll pick on Patty. Patty would be a great small group leader. If I could take that data and know that I could have an intentional conversation with Patty relative to you, who you'd be a great campus pastor, but Patty would be a great small group leader. Those are some of those components that absolutely make a difference.
Great. So one of the things that was kind of an eye opener for me, and that was kind of going alongside with you studying how to reach millennials, is the concept of the felt need, right? So we think about the church, we think about inviting people into community and into discipleship, and that's kind of like what we're all about. We want to develop people into discipleship. But when somebody's scrolling through Facebook, typically a lot of these people that we're trying to reach, they're not looking for an ad saying, come join us in our discipleship, right? What they are feeling, what their felt needs are, is like, my marriage is in a wreck.
Right.
So what they need to hear from the local church, in many cases in certain communities, is come to this event so that you can get your marriage fixed.
That's right.
They don't want to hear an invitation to church. They want an invitation to something that is a direct felt need of what they're dealing with right now. And of course, the church is blessed to be in a position where it can speak into having healthy relationships and marriages.
That's right.
So you get to know the community, understand what the felt needs are. You customize the programs behind what the felt needs are, and then those programs become an on-ramp into a worship community and a discipleship journey.
That's right. We used to say, especially some of maybe the more non-denominational churches, they're like, the front door is always the weekend. It's like, that's never actually been true. The front door to the church, I won't chase this rabbit, just so everybody knows, the front door, the largest front door to your church is your website. Ever since Al Gore invented the internet, you had more people showing up through the web door than you have your front door.
Right.
We've just never pastored our people that way, but I'll set that aside for a second. So then we have these other things of like, well, we don't do marriage ministry because we're a simple church. Just be in a group and you're good. Well, what we're finding out is like the long play here is, hey, I have to develop trust with people before they'll ever step foot in my building to hear a message about Jesus. And I happen to know around your guys' location, you know, the number one motivation of people around your church, both locations, is low continuous learning. So you're going to say, hey, come to this class. Well, guess what? Majority of those people aren't motivated by education. So calling it a class or a seminar is a waste of everybody's time. They're not motivated that way.
Right.
But if you said, hey, come to this date night, now you're talking about, hey, it's not a class. Oh, it's
an event. It's
an
fun.
Event. It's an experience. It's something different. It's so even that slight messaging absolutely matters when we're talking about reaching people. And you don't even have to do the event. If you just there's a distinction to be made of what do we create versus what do we curate. You guys probably aren't in the best position to be more of curators than creators. So what I would be doing if I were you, looking at the data, is like, how do I curate in resource and value for the people? So if I am going to do some limited marketing or outreach, I don't want to offend anybody, so outreach, we're gonna curate in a resource around date night, and then we're just going to give people that value. And we're not doing an event. We're just going to give them value. But then guess what? They're going to start attaching that value with your local church. And now you're subtly backing into earning the right to then ask them to show up. Right. That's the big flip that's happening right now, is it's no longer like status quo and culturally a norm to go to church. It's actually the opposite. Back in the day, back 20, 30 years ago, the culture dictated we should go to church on Sunday. Now it's like, nope, there's no value at the church. I don't need to go. So you've got to figure out the way in which we can earn the right to ask them. And some of that stuff is looking at the data. And like I said, it doesn't mean you guys need to stand up an 18-year-old female left-handed ministry. Like I'm not advocating for that.
Right.
I'm saying that there's probably ways that you can curate in content and value to the 18-year-old female who's left-handed. Great. We don't have to start a full ministry for it.
Wow. You've talked about church as an engagement framework.
Yep.
What does that mean? Tell me what an engagement framework is.
So over the last 10, 15 years that we've been kind of playing, we just play. We have a lot of fun. We've kind of started seeing this pattern emerge. And we kind of stumbled into this idea that Google calls it the jobs to be done. Okay. So they have a thing that says, if you've got a nail, you're going to hire a hammer to pound the nail in. You could hire your hand. It's going to hurt. It probably won't be as effective as a hammer. You could hire a screwdriver. Probably won't be as effective as a hammer. But we at the church have jobs that we are all doing. So I say it this way, like 5 staves of a water barrel, each church is doing these 5 things no matter what. You can call them different names, but you're all doing these 5 things. And the impact of your church is associated with how you do these 5 things. The first thing is what we call attract. And so I think awareness. And the basic thought is, does the persona that you're trying to reach in the community know you exist as a church? That is a job that you are hiring things to solve. Some of you are hiring Facebook to do outreach to increase your brand awareness. Christ Greenfield is hiring the sign out on the freaking side of the road that says, we're here. We hired that sign for attract. The bumper stickers you guys put together, what are you hiring that thing to do? Well, it's awareness, brand awareness, attract. Then we hire the next job is get. Can you get the persona to show up one time? Okay, the next job is keep. Can you keep the persona? Can you keep that persona connected to the church? Grow. Is that individual actually growing? Not activity-based, but actual growth. And the scorecard under grow, just so everybody knows, the new scorecard that's emerging right now is around the 5 dimensions of human flourishing. It's national data, it's national research. Harvard and Barna basically put it together. And most of the churches that I run with have now adopted the 5 dimensions of human flourishing as the scorecard for grow. So think about this going into your board meetings or your elder meetings. Hey, here's the butts, budgets, baptisms, and buildings. Great. But those activities don't equal outcomes. But these 5 dimensions of human flourishing do predict outcome. So relationship, spiritual formation, mental and behavioral health, finance, and vocation. Those are the kind of the key buckets. And then multiply.
You can measure that.
You can measure that. That's right. That's what you should be measuring underneath grow. That's that's the scorecard. Then the last job that you're doing is multiply. Are you flipping people from consumer to contributor, and not financially, but are they flipping and becoming disciple makers? Like, are you as a church in the disciple making business or the disciple making business, right? Like, we want to flip those people into becoming multipliers. So those are the 5 jobs. Every church is doing them. You know, I'm here in Atlanta, and we'll just keep this just amongst friends, even though we're recording it. You know, North Point is trying to solve for keep and grow. Like, they're actually on the decline, and they're scratching their head going, okay, like, what does this mean? What does it look like? And so each church, their impact is associated with how you do those 5 things.
How you talked about the flourishing, right? How would somebody dig deeper into that concept?
So one of the things that I would suggest is Barna actually has a free assessment layer, and it's powered by Glue, but it doesn't matter. A free assessment that you guys could start beginning to snapshot. What I'm advising churches to do is embrace the operating system, kind of like your phone. You know, I've got an Apple phone, so it's iOS is the operating system. Well, the programs, the services, and the applications that exist on my phone do not work if I don't have an operating system. So now that you have the framework of the church engagement framework, now you can start running through these exercises like we did with you guys. I mean, hey, we're going to do this date night. Great. What are you hiring the date night to solve? Is it a get function? Is it a keep function? Is it a grow function? Based upon what I'm hiring it to do, I can now attach the right analytics behind it, and I know what to measure. So if it was a get function, well, how many net new people showed up to the date night? But if it was a keep function, how many people existing at our church leverage this to stay connected to our church?
Right.
If it was a grow function, I'm probably going to wrap it with an assessment that says good, bad, or indifferent. Right. Those are the components that we should be looking for. And based upon the job that you're trying to solve, determines the capability that you would want to hire, whether it's data, whether it's Facebook, whether it's an assessment, it doesn't matter. But now that you know the operating system, you guys can then start basically hiring the right capabilities to measure what matters versus, you know, the moment. I always say in church world, we were good at measuring moments. We very rarely measured movements, but that's the path that we should be doing.
So let me just be clear for folks then. What you're saying the operating system is defining how you're going to measure flourishing. Is that what you're saying?
The operating system in and of itself, the church engagement framework, is just the jobs to be done.
Jobs to be done.
Yep. That's all. Every church is doing those 5 jobs.
Got it.
What the 5 dimensions of human flourishing, that really is the scorecard for grow.
Got it. So the grow part, the flourishing. Got it. Just to make
that's
sure.
Right.
Thanks for my clarity. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And I'll send you guys the notes, and I'm gonna share some slides that I'll make sure that the team gets, so you guys can kind of visualize it and see it. And I'm telling you, it's a game changer for churches. Like, I've just seen this now where they're fully embracing that operating system. And now they're really starting to say, okay, we're going to do a backpack drive. Great. No problem. Do all the backpack drives you want, but what are you hiring the backpack drive to solve? That's my question. Well, is it a keep function? Is it a grow function? Is it an awareness, attract function? Great. Again, we're not picking what's winning and losing. All we're doing is trying to organize our thought, because in church, I have the greatest idea. We're going to do this thing. And it's like, well, was it successful? Like,
right.
Well, it depends upon what job you were hiring it to solve.
Absolutely. Cool. We have used data to kind of evaluate programs when we roll out programs. And so that was one of the big ahas from us learning from you in Accelerator was when we start a program, we learned about the concept of the lean startup, the build, measure, learn. We want to build, we want to measure, we want to learn from it. We want to accelerate, which means we want to build a program quickly, right? Because the enemy of ministry is to take too long to respond to things. And so you want to actually identify, build, implement quickly, but then use really good data to know that you're succeeding.
That's right.
So there's a lot of great tools to measure. We've used the Net Promoter. You've also suggested some others. You want to talk about some of these tools that people can use to measure the effectiveness of ministry and programs when they roll them out to meet the felt needs of the community?
Totally. Yeah. So a couple of things on the build, measure, learn. One is and again, some of this we're ripping off from what other companies are doing, like companies and other churches are doing. So it's not like an original thought here,
Right.
but go into it knowing that you can kill whatever it is you're starting. Like I say it this way, the graveyard at Google is massive. They have killed so many stinking products. It's not even funny. And then they got into it with Microsoft and they were playing games showing who has a bigger graveyard because, there's been a lot. So go into it thinking that like, we don't even know if this is going to work. Now I've got the flexibility and freedom to say, we're going to test, we're going to learn. It's a hypothesis. It's 7th grade science all over again. And from that perspective, it frees us up to be able to run. And then to your point, the learning exercise, it's like, hey, we're going to tweak this thing at this event to move it because it really didn't solve forget. We didn't get anybody new. It really was a grow function. Well, now that I know that, we're going to take the learnings, we're going to tweak it, we're going to put it under grow, and we're going to measure those things.
That's the main paradigm shift for people in ministries to say failure is okay.
It is.
Failure is okay as long as I'm learning something incredibly valuable from this experiment that we're running, right?
The key is to fail fast. That's really what we want to fail as quickly as possible because people, and this isn't like a gravity statement, but it's like because people's lives are at risk, right? I mean, we don't want people to miss the boat of bumping into Jesus. I hope not. And so
if you're trying to attract and get and grow, if you're going to fail in 6 weeks, don't fail in 6 months.
That's right. That's exactly right. And really empower your teams to be orienting themselves to that. Far too often we hold them so accountable to the success of this one thing. And it's like, who gives a crap? Like, we're going to learn, we're going to run, and we're going to go fast. And in the context of what I call safe to fail experiments, you don't want to necessarily fail fast with a $10 million, capital.
Right. It's going to sink your budget. Right.
Right. So,
right.
But we far too often worry about, like, I say it this way. It's like, we want the Lamborghini. We want the shell of the car. It looks great, but it's got a lawnmower engine in it. Right. We spend so much time trying to polish the exterior of it, but the meat of it was a joke. Then you've got this, this diesel truck that's got a massive engine and it looks really bad, but man, that's a beast that'll get where you need to go. Right. So be thinking and encourage the flexibility of your teams to actually embrace that methodology of safe to fail experiments. And we just are going to fail really fast.
Wow. Cool. So talk about some of that. How are you using data then to create that loop, to close the loop on that?
Yep. So I'm glad you brought that one back up. So here's the biggest issue that I've seen with churches right now is we're kind of one directional. And what I mean by that is we run an event, we get there's a church up in Detroit, Michigan. They call it some guy syndrome. And some guy came up to me and said this thing, therefore it must have been fantastic. Right.
Yep.
So it's this one directional flow of information. What we're now starting to see churches do is what I call closing the feedback loop. So we're going to do something and we're going to ask about it. We're going to do something else. We're going to ask about it. And it doesn't, and a lot of the more seeker-ish churches, I'll say that in a nice way. A lot of the more seeker-ish churches, they're like, we don't ask our people anything. We don't ask any questions. And how do you know you're doing anything? Right. Like, we don't want to go so far as to like God forbid somebody tells us that it was a 6 on my sermon versus a 10, and I'm somehow offended. It's like, no, I don't control them. So churches that are making the paradigm shift of closing feedback loops, to your point, like the Net Promoter Score, how likely are you to recommend my church, this event, this kids program, this backpack drive to a friend or family member?
Right.
And based upon that, you now know, hey, it was good, bad, or indifferent. And from that perspective, there's a formula, and I'll make sure you guys get the formula. There's a formula that you could ask that one question and know where you're at on the spectrum of whatever it is you did.
Yep.
Now, here's the thing too, as you're in the R&D sort of like motion, and like I said, I would do this for everything. Anytime we did an event or something, we had 3 questions that we always asked everybody. The Net Promoter Score, we got generation, and well, I take that back. There were 4. Age as a generation, not age as a number. Okay.
Yeah.
The reason why
are you a millennial? Are you a boomer?
That's right.
That kind of thing.
So use that because you need to anchor the research in a generation. If I tell you, if I tell you 42, well, I don't know if that's millennial or lower Gen Xer, that's a millennial. But if you just bucket it in the generations, you can now be massively smarter. So that's one. Gender is the other one. And then so age, gender, then the Net Promoter Score. And then the last one is an open field where they can just write in notes. I want the qualitative just as much as I want the quantitative. We were just talking about that before we started. The importance of both of them are massive.
Yes.
And here's what you do with this information is to develop a data-informed culture and a closing of the feedback loops within your church. You're going to send out that survey, and then the following day, you're going to send out the results to everybody, even if they didn't fill out the survey to begin with. Here's what you want to do. You want to show them that you are willing to close the loop with them. So what this practically looks like is if you're going to do the prayer request exercise, share with your congregation the word cloud.
Yeah.
As soon as you do that, they're like, oh my gosh, that's what everybody in our church is asking for prayer about. I can pray for people because I know that now.
Yep.
You lowered the bar of entry into ministry. And that's really what we're trying to do. When we talk about engagement, that's a small step. Them just fill out a survey, 4 questions. That's a small step that is better than nothing. Right. So we're developing that anyway. Yeah.
And by sharing that, like say the Net Promoter, when they give comments and stuff like that, by sharing that data, it's reinforcing the fact that you really value the feedback that they're providing.
Quit.
And that this is not a waste of time. This is actually, the 2 minutes I spend on this survey is valuable.
Quit extracting information from your people and bless them with the value that they probably can comprehend what it is that they're doing. And they see themselves then contributing to the mission. Now you're talking about multiply. You're solving for multiply. Right. So it's imperative that we develop that habit where, and again, you don't have to boil the ocean. Just start small, but start again, like do something. That's the key.
You had some other questions that you were using for like very experimental type of programs. What were those other questions that you were talking about?
Oh yeah. So one of the questions, for example, was how would you, let me get the phrasing here right. How would you feel if you could no longer use fill in the blank, celebrate recovery, right?
Date night, whatever.
Date night. How would you feel if you could no longer use that? And there's 3 answers. It's very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, not disappointed at all. And here's the paradigm shift in knowing if you want to run deep with the thing or if you need to kill it. You want to run deep with the people who would be very disappointed. You don't care, I hate to say it that way, you don't really care about the somewhat disappointed or not disappointed at all. I don't really need their feedback, and I'm not trying to convince them that it's the thing. I really want to anchor in the people who are passionate about it, why. And that's really what you want to draw out so that you can better build, measure, learn that program. You can create a better experience. Or maybe there's something embedded within it that you didn't even plan for that happened that now you can actually systematize.
Right. So these are the people that value the product. And I mean, the reality is even a fantastic date night program, well, it's only going to be, if you're fantastic, maybe 10% of the community's part of it.
Right.
The other part, they're moving on with life, right? So you need to find out for the people that value it, why is it valuable?
Yeah.
Right?
What's the main benefit that they got? What are the type of people that they think would benefit from this, et cetera, et cetera.
Wonderful. Yeah, we had learned when we were running date night, there was a theme that started popping up, and it took us several months to kind of figure this out. It had almost nothing to do with the type of events that we were hosting. It had almost entirely everything to do with the childcare we were offering.
That's right.
That's what they cared about. Those were the themes that kept popping up. It's like, are my kids safe? The check-in was a little difficult, or who are these people? And so we started to realize, oh, this is the secret to having a great experience, is to know my kids are safe.
That's right.
That it's not very expensive childcare. And just by providing that and kind of saying, so that when we realized that was the heart of what we were doing, it was almost like, well, use our childcare, go on a date, do our event, or do your own thing. We just care that you go on a date, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, that's the type of slight pivoting that if we knew that thing, man, we've got the entire facility that we could help people go out on a date night, and we don't even have to run the program. We've got background checked people. We've got the infrastructure and checking kids in and out. We've got all the safety mechanisms. We don't have to. It's sort of like the difference between Uber or Yellow Cab. Uber doesn't own any of the cars. You don't have to own the program. You can just provide them a tool that enables them to go do that thing. And you solve that by running childcare. And again, they're going to attach the value that they derived from your local church. So now they're willing to start depositing trust, AKA time, into that local church. That's massive.
We're getting a note from Tanya. We've got about 10 minutes left to kind of hit any other key points that we've got. Where would you say, I mean, you've talked about prayers. What would you say are other low-hanging fruit for churches? We've got a diversity of churches probably joining us, from large churches with high resources, smaller churches that maybe it's just a pastor and one or two staff. What does it look like for people to go after low-hanging fruit then? You mentioned prayers. What are some other things, sort of easy wins to become more data informed in your ministry?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts that I've seen just work no matter the church, right? And it doesn't have to be super complicated. And some of the resources that Glue has, I'm not the best person at Glue to know all the stuff. But there's stuff there that we've got that you can use for free, and it wouldn't take much. So a couple of things is you need to begin to embrace the idea that everybody wants to contribute value to the mission of the church. Think of the paradigm from a scarcity mindset to abundance. Okay. That's really what we should be anchoring in. So don't necessarily worry about, well, how does this scale? You don't care about scale with what we're talking about right now. You care about understanding the pattern of 0 to 1. What did it take from 0 to 1? What did it take from 0 to 1? Then once we've seen the pattern, we can then worry about scale. You can wrap systems around it. You can use Google Sheets instead of a note card. You can do whatever, right? Like all of that stuff comes later. But this idea that everybody wants to contribute value, you just have to figure out and unlock their desire to contribute value. Meaning, what if you just started asking for stories? Like send an email that just says, hey, we would love after Easter. Just imagine this, after Easter on Tuesday, send a note to everybody and say, would you be willing to share a story that has happened for Easter? Like easy, super simple. And then figure out the right way to close the feedback loop with them on Thursday that week. Hey, we had 75 stories that came forward, and here were just a couple of highlights, right? That's a small step that they can see themselves contributing to the mission of the church versus just consuming. What if we're testing this out right now actually during Holy Week, we're testing this out. On Tuesday, we have 12 churches. There's about 10,000 people across the 12. We're going to text everybody in the church on Tuesday for a prayer request. On Thursday, we're going to send them the top prayer that going into Easter from their entire congregation. And we're asking them is, will you just step over this small little bar and think a good thought for all of the people that you know that are in this church? And this is the top thing that they're asking for prayer about. Mm-hmm. All we did was enable them to step over the bar at a low risk, right? And we're not looking for everybody. Abundance versus scarcity says those that want it will do it. Those that don't. But we're starting to make that culture shift of share a story, share a prayer request. What would happen if on a monthly basis you did those two things? Here's the top prayer request once a month. And equip your people to actually be contributors to the mission of the church. That's low bar, guys.
Right. Yeah, I guess my recommendation for folks would be to lean into the Net Promoter Score.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because, and if anybody wants help, this is something we've coached several churches on how to get into measuring Net Promoter. It's pretty easy to set up a template with SurveyMonkey has a pre-built one that you can just like tweak and roll with. And so that is like in my opinion, a low-hanging fruit. And then also kind of using the Glue platform to really get to know your community, get to know your church, get to know the community surrounding the church. So what would it look like for people, next steps, if they wanted to do Glue? Talk about the services you guys provide.
Yeah, so Glue's got a bunch of different applications, as I call them, that exist that you guys can get access to. And I'll make sure, again, I'll get you I've got some slides here that I'll make sure that you guys get, and I'll give you the website for Glue. There's, like I said, there's free stuff like a Know Your Community report that's free that you can just run and you'll have more data than you know what to do with off in that single report. And again, even if you don't do anything else, you just acknowledge this is the reality of my people. If you found out 25% of the population around your 5 miles of your church is in the top decile for divorce, I think you're going to know what to probably want to lean into. I hope. So some stuff like that. There's some assessment stuff. So underneath that grow category, again, the 5 dimensions of human flourishing Barna assessment is there. That's free. And again, that's a scorecard that you can now take and say, okay, twice a year, we're going to run this snapshot, and it's going to inform, man, we really like one of the things that we're seeing right now across the landscape of church is vocational formation is a massive hole in majority of the churches. And people are saying, I am struggling in my vocational formation. Church, can you help me? So we're seeing a big shift into what does it look like for churches to pastor differently from a vocation perspective than just, hey, come to church. Great. That doesn't help me when I spend, the rest of my hours at work. So, so that the other, so glue dot, it's gloo.us.
Glue.us. Two O's.
It's 2 O's.
Okay. We are rounding the end of the corner here. Matt, you had talked about a book that people might want to be interested in checking out. Talk a little bit about that.
So a buddy of mine and I co-authored a book, kind of like Patrick Lencioni's Fables. We took that same approach. It's called 14 Fridays. We wrote the book. It's on Amazon. You can get it or do whatever.
We'll send a link to folks. Yeah.
And basically what I just kind of crash coursed, we just take it from a pastor who lives in Denver, Colorado. He's struggling. His board has told him he's got, basically 14 Fridays to turn the church around or he's fired. And we basically talk through all of the learnings that we've just kind of begun to see. There's some note cards in there that you'll be able to, like, we actually took the time to draw stuff out so people can, like, the Net Promoter Score is in there. How to run that, we call it a play in that perspective. But yeah, it's just a good educational layer. It's an easy read, couple hundred pages.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for all of this information. Every time I hear you talk, I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose. Yeah. It's just, there's always an aha moment when I hear you talk. So just a real pleasure. Thank you so much. For the folks that are joining us, we're getting near the end of the webinar. I just want to kind of talk about what's coming up next week, or not next week, next month, April 28th. at 11 a.m. Arizona time. I believe it's Jake. Is that right, Tanya? Jake will be presenting on the 6 types of working genius. This is Patrick Lencioni's work, and we're using that. This is another example of data, kind of using data to try and help build more effective teams. We've got the accelerator coming up, a leadership accelerator. More than we can talk about to talk about what's going on, but think about coming together in cohorts and working on leadership development and creating a leadership culture in your church. And that's starting April 29th. And so if you guys have any interest on what it looks like to build a leadership culture in your church, check out our website, uniteleadership.org, and you can see the webinars that are coming up and the accelerator that's coming up. We'd love for you to consider participating in all of these events. Next step for all of you is you should be getting an email shortly with a recording of this, as well as some of the attachments that Matt's talking about. So we're going to give you these resources. If anybody also wants to learn more about Net Promoter, we're happy on our end to kind of give some information about that. We've used it extensively. We've got folks in our sphere that can give you some coaching on that. Matt, thank you so much. Hey, can we wrap up in prayer? Would you mind sharing a word of prayer for some of the folks here that are joining us?
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you for the time. Thank you for the ministry and the passion of every person in here, and the goal of helping people just bump into you, Lord. So just equip us, allow us to process with the information that we went through today. But most importantly, Lord, I just pray that we can take something away and do something with it. That we can begin to find the right stewardship balance of learning and testing and iterating versus the chase and Sunday. So we just thank you so much for all that you've done. Thank you for your son and coming up into Easter. We just thank you for what it means. In Jesus' name.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Take care. God bless. And we'll be in touch soon.